In the early morning hours of June 16th, 1959, a single shot shattered the silence of a Benedict Canyon home in Los Angeles. The man who had embodied truth, justice, and the American way for millions of television viewers lay dead in his bedroom, a Luger pistol nearby. George Reeves, the 45-year-old actor who had brought Superman to life on the small screen, was gone. The Los Angeles Police Department quickly ruled that he did it himself, but the circumstances surrounding that night have fueled speculation for more than 6 decades. From a weapon with no fingerprints to a fiancé who allegedly predicted his death before it happened, this death remains one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. George Reeves was born George Brewer on January 5, 1914, in Woolstock, Iowa. His early life was marked by instability after his parents separated, and he eventually took the surname Reeves from his stepfather. Blessed with rugged good looks and natural charisma, young George set his sights on Hollywood. He made his film debut in 1939 with a small but memorable role in Gone with the Wind, playing one of the Tarleton twins who flirt with Scarlett O'Hara in the opening scene. The role seemed to promise a bright future in motion pictures, and Reeves spent the next decade appearing in a string of films, though none brought him the stardom he craved. After a fairly brief hiatus serving in the Army, he returned to Hollywood hoping for his big break. That break came in 1951 when Reeves was cast in the theatrical film Superman and the Mole Men, which led to the television series Adventures of Superman beginning in 1952. The show became a phenomenon, particularly among children who idolized the square-jawed hero who could fly through the air and stop bullets with his chest. Reeves embraced the role with enthusiasm, making personal appearances at schools and hospitals where young fans could meet their hero in the flesh. Given that he was an idol to so many youngsters, he cleaned up his personal life, quitting smoking so as not to set a bad example. For 6 seasons, he was the face of Superman, and his portrayal became so iconic that it would define the character for an entire generation. However, success came with a price. Reeves found himself hopelessly typecast, unable to escape the cape and tights that had made him famous. Producers saw only Superman when they looked at him, and serious dramatic roles dried up. A particularly painful blow came when his scenes in the prestigious 1953 film From Here to Eternity were cut because test audiences laughed at seeing Superman in a different context. By the time Adventures of Superman ended in 1958, Reeves was struggling professionally, and according to some accounts, personally. He had begun drinking heavily and was frustrated by his stalled career, worried that he would never be able to break out of his starring role. Nevertheless, he had recently signed on to direct and possibly star in new projects, suggesting that his future was not as bleak as some have claimed. The final night of George Reeves's life began innocuously enough. He and his fiancée, Leonore Lemon, had dinner with friends before returning to his Benedict Canyon home. Around midnight, Reeves went upstairs to bed while Lemon continued entertaining guests downstairs. When additional visitors arrived, the noise apparently disturbed Reeves, who came downstairs irritated and reportedly had words with Lemon before returning to the bedroom. What happened next depends on whose account one believes, but around 1:30 that morning, a shot was heard from upstairs. According to witnesses, Leonore had made a strange comment moments before, telling guests that Reeves was going to shoot himself in a strange and detached way. The remark seemed oddly prophetic, and some investigators would later find it deeply suspicious. When police arrived, they found Reeves unclothed on his bed with a single wound to his right temple. A Luger, the iconic German pistol, lay on the floor between his feet, and a spent shell casing was discovered beneath his body. The scene was quickly deemed to have been caused by him alone, and the case was closed within weeks. But almost immediately, troubling questions emerged. The Luger had no fingerprints on it, which seemed impossible if Reeves had fired it himself. Bruises were found on his head and body that couldn't be easily explained. 2 additional bullet holes were discovered in the bedroom floor, suggesting the gun had been fired on previous occasions, or that the death scene was not what it appeared. Perhaps most damning, the witnesses downstairs had waited between 30 and 45 minutes before calling the police, a delay that has never been satisfactorily explained. The investigation into potential suspects inevitably focused on the complicated romantic life of George Reeves. For nearly 8 years before his death, he had been involved in a passionate affair with Toni Mannix, the wife of Eddie Mannix. He was a powerful MGM executive known throughout Hollywood as a fixer with alleged connections to the mob. Toni had showered Reeves with expensive gifts during their relationship, including helping him purchase the very house where he would perish. When Reeves ended the affair in 1958 to pursue a relationship with the much younger Leonore Lemon, Toni was reportedly devastated and furious. In the months before his death, Reeves complained of receiving harassing phone calls and threats that he attributed to his scorned former lover. The situation became so troublesome that he allegedly considered taking legal action. Some investigators have theorized that Eddie Mannix, despite appearing to tolerate the affair, may have arranged for Reeves to be eliminated, either to avenge his wife's honor or at her request. Others have pointed the finger directly at Toni herself, suggesting she hired someone to off the man who had broken her heart. Neither theory has ever been proven, and the Mannixes were never charged with any crime related to the death. Leonore also drew suspicion. Her peculiar comment predicting the shot, combined with the long delay in calling authorities, struck many observers as highly unusual. Some have speculated that an argument between Lemon and Reeves that night escalated to violence, perhaps accidentally, and that the scene was then staged. Lemon herself gave inconsistent statements to police and later fled to New York, refusing to cooperate with subsequent investigations. She maintained until her own death in 1989 that Reeves had done it himself, but her behavior in the aftermath has never stopped raising eyebrows. The official ruling that Reeves turned the Luger on himself has never been changed, despite multiple attempts to reopen the case. More than 60 years later, the truth about what happened to George Reeves potentially remains locked away. The fingerprint-free Luger, the unexplained bruises, the bizarre behavior of the witnesses, and the tangled web of jealousy and Hollywood power all point to something darker. I keep coming back to the significant delay between the shot and the call to police, because it feels inherently suspicious to me. If a shot erupts in a house full of people, and the explanation is truly straightforward, why does nearly an hour pass before anyone picks up the phone? That window looks like time to talk, to calm nerves, to move objects, to decide what story everyone will tell when authorities arrive. Real panic calls happen immediately. This pause suggests calculation. It suggests people realizing in real time that what just happened couldn't be allowed to stand on its own without some coaching. At midnight on June 29, 2001, Patricia Adkins clocked out from her shift at the Honda plant in Marysville, Ohio, and walked into the darkness of the parking lot. The 29-year-old single mother believed she was about to embark on the romantic adventure of her life, a secret getaway to Canada with the man she loved. Instead, she vanished without a trace. Her car remained in the lot, and the married co-worker she had trusted with her secrets and nearly all of her savings would become the prime suspect. More than 2 decades later, Patty Adkins has never been found, and no one has been held accountable for whatever happened to her that night. Patty was born on May 4th, 1972, and raised in the Marysville area. By 29, she had worked her way up to a supervisory position at the massive Honda assembly plant. It was a good job with very solid pay in a community where such opportunities didn't grow on trees. She was a devoted mother to her young daughter and maintained close relationships with her family. Friends described her as warm, trusting, and perhaps a little too willing to see the best in people. That trusting nature would prove to be her undoing when she fell for a coworker who had no intention of giving her the future she dreamed about. His name was Brian Flowers, and he was also a supervisor at the Honda plant. He was married with children, but that didn't stop him from pursuing a secret relationship with Patty that lasted approximately 2 years. Brian convinced Patty to keep their affair hidden from everyone, telling her that he needed time to leave his wife, and that secrecy was essential. Patty believed him completely, so much so that she gave him approximately $90,000 from her savings, money supposedly meant to help them start their new life together. As the summer of 2001 approached, Brian presented Patty with an exciting plan. They would take a romantic trip to Canada over the 4th of July holiday weekend. But to maintain secrecy, Patty would need to hide in the bed of Brian's Ford pickup truck while he drove out of the Honda parking lot. Once safely away, she could climb into the cab and they would head north together. It was an unusual arrangement, but Patty agreed without hesitation. Patty withdrew money from her account and told her family she was going on a trip, though she remained vague about the details. She arranged for her daughter to stay with relatives. On the night of June 29th, Patty finished her shift, said goodbye to co-workers, and headed out to the parking lot where Brian was waiting. She was never seen again. When Patty failed to return home or contact her family over the holiday weekend, concern quickly turned to alarm. Her car was discovered still parked at the Honda plant. Her family reported her missing, and investigators began piecing together the secret life she had been living. They soon learned about the affair with Brian Flowers and the plan to hide in his truck. When confronted, Brian initially denied everything, claiming he barely knew Patty. But evidence and witness accounts told a different story, and he eventually admitted to the affair. Brian insisted that Patty never got into his truck that night. He claimed he went straight home after work. He insisted that he spent the holiday weekend camping with his wife and family, and had no idea what happened to his former lover. His wife backed up his alibi, but investigators found troubling inconsistencies in his story. Shortly after Patty vanished, Brian had taken his truck to a car wash and thoroughly scrubbed the bed. When forensic technicians later examined the vehicle, they discovered a small speck of blood that DNA testing determined was consistent with Patty's genetic profile. That single drop of blood has haunted the case ever since. It suggests that something happened in the bed of that truck, something that Brian Flowers has never adequately explained. Yet despite years of investigation, prosecutors have never felt they had enough to bring charges. Without a body, without witnesses, without a confession, the case against Flowers has remained frustratingly incomplete. He has continued to maintain his innocence and has never been arrested or charged in relation to any offenses. In 2006, Patty Adkins was declared legally dead, though her remains have never been recovered. The Union County Sheriff's Office has periodically renewed appeals and assigned new investigators to the case, though no breakthrough has yet to come. On the morning of September 10, 2017, hotel security at the Crowne Plaza Chicago O'Hare in Rosemont, Illinois, made a grim discovery in a place no one should ever die. The body of 19-year-old Kenika Jenkins lay inside a walk-in freezer in the hotel's kitchen. Her life ended by the cold after she had apparently wandered into the unit and become trapped. Her mother had been at the hotel for hours, pleading with staff to search for her missing daughter, only to be met with delays and indifference. By the time Kenika was found, she had been dead for nearly a day. The official ruling called it an accident, but questions about what really happened that night continue to haunt her family and fuel speculation years later. Born on May 27, 1998, and raised on the west side of Chicago, Kenika was known to friends and family as a vibrant and outgoing person who loved to have fun. The evening of September 8, 2017, began like countless other Friday nights for young people looking to blow off steam. Kenika and a group of friends headed to the Crowne Plaza Hotel near O'Hare Airport, where a party was being held in a room on the 9th floor. The gathering was a typical scene of young adults drinking, socializing, and capturing the night on social media. Kenika was drinking alcohol and had reportedly taken topiramate, a non-recreational anticonvulsant medication that can amplify the effects of the substance. As the night wore on and the drinks flowed, Kenika became increasingly intoxicated. Surveillance footage would later show just how impaired she had become. Sometime in the early morning hours of September 9th, Kenika became separated from her friends. Accounts vary as to exactly how this happened, but the result was that a heavily intoxicated young woman found herself wandering alone through the hallways of a large hotel. Surveillance cameras captured her stumbling through corridors on various floors, clearly disoriented and struggling to walk. She bounced off walls, staggered in circles, and appeared completely unaware of her surroundings. Around 3:20 in the morning, the cameras recorded Kenika entering the hotel's kitchen area. This was a section of the hotel that should have been off limits to guests, particularly at that hour, but apparently no security measures prevented her from wandering in. The kitchen led to a storage area that included a large walk-in freezer used for food storage. At some point, Kenika entered that freezer. The door latched behind her. Whether she pushed through it accidentally, mistaking it for an exit, or stumbled in without understanding where she was, remains unclear. What is certain is that once inside, she couldn't get out. Hours passed before anyone raised the alarm. Around 4:30 in the morning, Kenika's friends realized she was missing and called her mother. Teresa Martin rushed to the hotel, arriving around 5 a.m., and immediately demanded that staff help find her daughter. According to Martin and her attorneys, the hotel was slow to respond and dismissive of her concerns. Staff reportedly told her that her daughter had probably left with someone or would turn up eventually. Martin grew increasingly frantic as the hours ticked by with no sign of Kenika. She begged them to check the security footage and search the premises, but claims her pleas were ignored. It was not until approximately 12:30 a.m. on September 10th, nearly 24 hours after Kenika was last seen on camera, that her body was finally discovered. A hotel security officer conducting a search found her in the walk-in freezer, her body frozen and lifeless. The young woman who had been laughing and partying with friends just hours earlier was gone. The medical examiner would later determine that Kenika died from hypothermia caused by prolonged exposure to the freezing temperatures. Her blood alcohol level was measured at slightly above the legal driving limit, and the presence of topiramate in her system likely compounded her impairment. The official ruling was that Kenika Jenkins died in an accident. According to investigators, she had wandered drunkenly into a restricted area and accidentally trapped herself in the freezer. The Rosemont Police Department closed the case in October 2017, concluding that there was no evidence of foul play. But for Kenika's family and a massive online community that had become invested in the case, the official explanation raised more questions than it answered. Social media exploded with conspiracy theories in the days following Kenika's death. Amateur sleuths pored over every frame of the surveillance footage, claiming to see evidence that she had been followed, attacked, or even dragged into the freezer by unseen assailants. Videos posted by friends who had been at the party were scrutinized for hidden clues. Some theorists accused Kenneka's friends of involvement in her death, pointing to their behavior on social media as suspicious. The hashtag Justice for Kenneka trended nationally as thousands demanded that authorities reopen the investigation and consider the possibility of a slaying. While the conspiracy theories never produced credible evidence, legitimate questions about hotel negligence proved more substantial. Kenneka's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Crown Plaza, arguing that the hotel had failed in its duty to protect guests. Their attorneys pointed out that the freezer door could latch from the outside, effectively trapping anyone who entered. They argued that security was inadequate, that restricted areas were too easily accessible, and that staff had been negligent in responding to a mother's desperate pleas. The lawsuit painted a picture of a tragedy that could and should have been prevented if some basic measures were in place. In December 2023, more than 6 years after Kenneka's death, the family reached a settlement with the hotel reported to be worth approximately $10 million. The settlement did not include an admission of wrongdoing, but it represented at least some measure of accountability for the failures that contributed to the tragedy. The death of Kenneka Jenkins remains officially classified as an accident, the result of a young woman's impaired judgment leading her into a deadly situation. Ultimately, despite the theories online, there's no credible evidence that anyone harmed her intentionally or forced her into that freezer. However, the question of how a 19-year-old could stumble through a major hotel, clearly in distress, without a single employee noticing or intervening while on camera, remains open. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like and share this video if you're enjoying it and to hit the notification bell. Also, don't forget to check out the Patreon or the YouTube membership to take your support for my channel to the next level. Imagine a dusty storage room in the labyrinthine depths of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul in the autumn of 1929. A German theologian named Gustav Deissmann is hunched over stacks of neglected manuscripts, cataloging items that have lain forgotten for centuries. The Ottoman Empire has collapsed, the Republic of Turkey is barely 6 years old, and no one is quite sure what treasures lie buried in the old Sultan's palace. Deissmann unfurls a sheet of gazelle skin, yellowed with age and bearing elaborate illustrations in faded ink. He sees coastlines, ships with billowing sails, exotic animals, and inscriptions in Ottoman Turkish. He doesn't yet realize that he is holding a fragment of one of the most controversial maps in human history. He's holding a document that will ignite debates about medieval and ancient knowledge, lost civilizations, and the very nature of discovery itself. The Piri Reis map, as it would come to be known, was created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Muhyiddin Piri, who earned the honorific Reis, meaning admiral. Only about 1/3 of the original world map survives today, showing the Atlantic Ocean, the western coasts of Europe and Africa, and the eastern coastline of the Americas. The surviving fragment measures roughly 90 by 63 centimeters and is painted on gazelle hide in vivid colors that have faded but not disappeared over 5 centuries. What makes this particular document extraordinary isn't merely its age or its beauty, but the claims its creator made about his sources and the mysteries those claims have spawned. Piri Reis was born around 1465 in Gallipoli, a strategic naval town on the Dardanelles that served as a base for Ottoman maritime operations. His education in the arts of the sea began early, and his uncle, Kemal Reis, was one of the most feared corsairs in the Mediterranean. These were privateers who terrorized Spanish, Venetian, and other European shipping while serving the Ottoman Sultan. In essence, They were state-sponsored pirates. The young future admiral joined his uncle's crew at the age of 11 or 12, learning navigation, combat, and cartography in the crucible of actual naval battles. For decades, he sailed the Mediterranean and beyond, accumulating geographical knowledge that few could match. The map itself was completed in the month of Muharram in the Islamic year 919, corresponding to March or April of 1513. Piri Reis presented it to Selim the Grim in 1517 during the Ottoman conquest of Egypt. He was perhaps hoping to demonstrate the strategic value of his geographical expertise to the empire's expanding ambitions. The timing was significant. Columbus had reached the Caribbean only 21 years earlier. Vasco da Gama had rounded the Cape of Good Hope just 15 years before. The great age of European exploration was in its infancy, and yet here was an Ottoman admiral producing a world map of remarkable sophistication. The inscriptions on the map, written in Ottoman Turkish, provide a window into Piri Reis's methodology and his sources. He claimed to have consulted approximately 20 maps in constructing his composite image of the Atlantic world. Among these, he listed 8 Ptolemaic maps from the classical tradition, 4 Portuguese maps, an Arabic map, and a map that he claimed was made by Columbus himself. According to Piri Reis, this Columbus map had been captured from a Spanish sailor during a naval engagement in the Mediterranean in 1501. The sailor had reportedly accompanied Columbus on 3 voyages to the New World and carried a copy of the explorer's own chart. This claim about the Columbus source has fascinated historians for nearly a century. No map made by Columbus is known to survive. The Piri Reis map shows the Caribbean islands with reasonable accuracy, including Cuba, Hispaniola, and the coastline that Columbus would have encountered on his voyages. The depiction isn't perfect, but it is consistent with the fragmentary knowledge that Spanish explorers possessed in the first decade of the 16th century. The shape of the islands, their relative positions, and certain specific details all point toward an early Spanish original. The controversy that has swirled around the Piri Reis map for decades, however, has less to do with Columbus than with the strange landmass depicted at the southern edge. The coastline extends southward from what appears to be South America, curving dramatically toward the east, in a manner that has provoked wild speculation. In 1960, a professor of history at Keene State College in New Hampshire, named Charles Hapgood, made a startling claim. He argued that this southern portion of the map depicted the coastline of Antarctica, and not merely Antarctica as we know it today, but Antarctica as it would appear without its ice sheet. Hapgood published his theory in a book called Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, proposing that the Piri Reis map preserved geographical knowledge from a lost civilization. The implications of Hapgood's theory were extraordinary. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, more than 3 centuries after Piri Reis created his map. Hapgood's book attracted the attention of fringe theorists, ancient astronaut enthusiasts, and Atlantis believers, who seized upon the map as evidence for their various speculations. The scholarly consensus, however, offers a far more mundane explanation. The southern landmass on the Piri Reis map is almost certainly not Antarctica at all. It's most likely a continuation of the South American coastline, distorted and bent eastward due to the conventions of Portolan chart construction. Portolan charts, the navigational maps used by Mediterranean sailors, typically showed coastlines curving around the edges of the parchment. They weren't designed to represent the spherical Earth on a flat surface with mathematical precision, but rather, they were practical tools for coastal navigation. When Piri Reis compiled his map from multiple sources, he was forced to reconcile different scales, orientations, and projections. Furthermore, the map may reflect the widespread Renaissance belief in a great southern continent, a hypothetical terra australis that appeared on many maps of the period. European cartographers had theorized since ancient times that a massive landmass must exist in the southern hemisphere to balance the known continents of the north. This theoretical continent appeared on maps long before any explorer actually reached Antarctic waters. The southern landmass on the Piri Reis map may simply represent this speculative geography, drawn from sources that were themselves based on theory rather than observation. What remains undeniable is the remarkable achievement that the map represents within its proper historical context. In 1513, the Ottoman Empire was engaged in an intellectual golden age, synthesizing knowledge from Arab, Persian, Greek, and now Renaissance European sources. Piri Reis stood at the intersection of multiple cartographic traditions and was able to synthesize them in a way few others could. He could read Arabic and had access to Islamic geographical texts that preserved classical learning largely still lost to medieval Europe. He also had access through naval combat and Mediterranean commerce to the latest Portuguese and Spanish discoveries. His map represents a moment of extraordinary cultural exchange, when information flowed across hostile borders and religious divides through the universal language of trade and conflict. Piri Reis would go on to produce an even more impressive work called the Book of Navigation in English, completed in 1521 and revised in 1525. This comprehensive atlas of the Mediterranean contained over 200 detailed charts and sailing directions, representing decades of accumulated maritime knowledge. He continued to serve the Ottoman Navy into old age, eventually rising to the rank of Admiral of the Fleet in the Arabian Sea. After an unsuccessful campaign against the Portuguese in the Persian Gulf in 1552, he returned to Egypt, where he was accused of abandoning his fleet. The Ottoman governor of Egypt ordered him beheaded, and the great cartographer died in disgrace, and his world map was rolled up and forgotten in a palace storeroom. In the turbulent years of early 20th century China, one of the era's most radical voices vanished. He Yin-jen, a pioneering anarchist and champion of women's liberation, disappeared from the historical record around 1920, leaving behind unanswered questions about her fate. For a woman who challenged tradition and advocated a complete social revolution, the end of her story remains an enduring enigma to this day. She was born Heban and emerged as a formidable voice for change during the last years of the Qing dynasty. She came from a prosperous family in Jiangsu, and unusually for a girl of her time, received a solid education in the Confucian classics. In 1903, she married Liu Shipei, a noted scholar and fellow revolutionary, moving with him to Shanghai to study at a progressive women's academy. Around this time, she adopted the pen name Heyin Zhen, deliberately including her mother's surname in defiance of traditional naming customs. From early on, Heiyin's outlook set her apart from other reformers. Many Chinese intellectuals saw women's emancipation mainly as a means to strengthen the nation. Heiyin argued that freeing women was a moral end in itself, not just a tool for national progress. She insisted that the oppression of women was entwined with imperialism, capitalism, and class hierarchy, issues far beyond China's domestic concerns. This broad vision made her a central and controversial figure in China's nascent feminist movement. By 1907, mounting political pressure forced Heiyin and her husband to flee China for exile in Tokyo. There, among Chinese exiles and student dissidents, she came into her own as an anarchist feminist leader. That same year, Heiyin co-founded the Society for the Restoration of Women's Rights and its journal Natural Justice as vehicles for her radical ideas. She demanded the overthrow of entrenched male privilege in Chinese society. Her organization advocated using force to topple women's oppressors and urged resistance against the ruling class and capitalist exploitation. In her writings, He Yin dissected how women were subjugated not only by Confucian tradition, but also by economic exploitation and state power. She observed with frustration that for centuries, women had been treated as playthings, and even in modern society they were regarded as mere tools to serve men's ends. Writing under various pen names, she published fiery essays in these journals, though later many of her articles were mistakenly credited to her husband, obscuring her contributions. He Yin's philosophy was revolutionary in every sense. She didn't believe that modest reforms like women's voting rights would suffice under an oppressive system. Instead, she held that only a complete social upheaval, dismantling class exploitation, capitalism, and government power, could achieve genuine gender equality. He Yin effectively decoupled feminism from narrow nationalism by insisting that women's freedom must be pursued for its own sake, rather than as a means to strengthen China. These uncompromising views alarmed authorities, who saw her as a dangerous radical. In 1908, He Yin and Liu had a bitter falling out with some of their revolutionary comrades amid accusations of colluding with the regime of the Qing Empire. By 1909, the couple returned to China and, in an ironic twist, went to work for the very Manchu government they had once opposed. After the Qing dynasty fell in 1911, Liu aligned himself with the new Republican regime and obtained a university post in Beijing. During these years, He Yin largely retreated from public life. Ostracized by former allies and likely disillusioned, the once fiery activist now lived quietly in the shadows, her days of revolutionary pamphleteering seemingly behind her. In 1919, tragically, Liu Shipei died of tuberculosis, leaving He Yin widowed at 35. Rumors soon arose about her fate, but none could be confirmed. One story claimed that grief drove her to become a Buddhist, where she adopted a new name and faded from history. Another held that she succumbed to a broken heart or mental collapse and died not long after. Either way, by around 1920, He Yin had vanished from public view. No reliable record of her life after that point exists. For decades after she disappeared, He Yin's contributions were almost lost to history. In a historical irony, her writings continued to be misattributed to male colleagues, particularly her husband, further obscuring her legacy. However, despite nearly a century of obscurity, scholars today recognize He Yin as a central figure in the birth of Chinese feminism. In the end, we may never learn whether she spent her final years in obscurity in a Buddhist monastery, or whether she perished soon after her husband. On a brutally cold November morning in 1985, a highway worker pulled into Montana's isolated Bad Route Rest area in Dawson County and made a gruesome discovery. There was a car parked there fully engulfed in flames with no one inside. The vehicle belonged to 67-year-old Dexter Stefanik of Wisconsin, who had been on a long drive home. This startling scene was the first hint of a mystery that would confound investigators for decades. Dexter was a retired widower from Rhinelander, Wisconsin. In November 1985, after visiting his son's family in Oregon, following his wife's death the year before, he decided it was time to drive back to Wisconsin alone. He set out on November 18th in his brown Plymouth Horizon and, to save money, planned to sleep at rest stops instead of motels during the 2,000-mile journey. The next morning, Dexter's car was found engulfed in flames at the Bad Route Rest area off Interstate 94. A highway worker who spotted the blaze alerted authorities, and the smoldering wreck was soon identified by its Wisconsin plates as Dexter's vehicle. There was no trace of Dexter himself. At first, there was no obvious evidence of a crime. With no body present, officials assumed it might simply be a stalled car and a missing driver. The incident was treated as a missing person case. Perhaps the driver had wandered away in the freezing -40 weather and hitched a ride after a breakdown. However, evidence at the scene quickly pointed to foul play. An arson investigator concluded the fire was deliberately set with gasoline, especially soaking the car's back seat. Furthermore, the driver's seat was found pushed all the way back, an odd position given Dexter's short stature, and this suggested someone much taller had been behind the wheel. Investigators began retracing events at the rest area that morning. They learned that earlier on November 19th, the rest stop's custodian and a highway maintenance supervisor had noticed an unattended white Chevy Blazer with Arizona plates parked there. The truck sported a distinctive blue stripe and a cattle guard front bumper, and it appeared someone might have been living out of it since clothes and bedding were visible inside. Around 9:30 a.m., not long before the fire was reported, the custodian encountered a tall, clean-shaven man, about 6 feet in height, driving Dexter's car. The stranger was carrying a couple of gasoline cans. When asked if he needed help, the man calmly explained that he had run out of gas and had fetched fuel, nothing unusual on the surface. By the time the burning car was discovered, this unknown man and the white Chevy truck had vanished. The implication was chilling. Hours into his trip, Dexter likely crossed paths with this individual at the deserted rest stop. But for months, Dexter's fate remained unknown, and the case stalled out quickly. Then, on March 8, 1986, a local couple dumping garbage at a remote landfill about 17 miles from the rest area stumbled upon disturbing evidence. They found a wallet with Dexter's ID lying on the ground, and nearby spotted personal items that hadn't been there on earlier visits, including a suitcase, clothing, and a shaving kit. Searching further, they made a horrific find. A human body partially buried under an old mattress, with a booted foot protruding from underneath. Authorities were called, and dental records confirmed the body to be Dexter Stefanik. The autopsy revealed he had been beaten and then shot twice in the back of the head. Despite the violence of the crime, some of Dexter's valuables were untouched. Cash was still in his suitcase, making robbery an unlikely motive. Investigators also noted a curious detail. Although Dexter's body had lain in the landfill for months, his clothing and luggage seemed to have been dropped off only recently. This strongly suggested that the perpetrator had returned to the dump site to dispose of evidence long after the slaying. Back at the Bad Root rest stop, detectives uncovered one last eerie clue. Scrawled in pencil on a wall inside the men's restroom was a line of graffiti that appeared to reference the crime. It read, "Hot Jock Shot from Wisconsin, 1185, followed by the statement, Saturday the 3rd. The words were too specific to ignore. Investigators believed the perpetrator left this cryptic message as a taunt. They also believed he was possibly using Hot Jock to refer to himself, and that it may have been his CB radio handle. The timing was also strange, since the writing was noticed only after Dexter's body was found months later. Whether genuine or a bizarre coincidence, the graffiti reinforced the sense that the perpetrator was brazenly bragging about the crime. Despite these clues, the investigation struggled to make headway. Detectives chased down countless leads trying to identify the tall stranger and his white truck. Under hypnosis, one witness recalled that the truck's Arizona license plate began with the numbers 147, which allowed police to narrow down a list of possible owners. Unfortunately, none of those leads panned out. Extensive interviews with people in Dexter's life also led nowhere, and he was well liked and had no known enemies. With no arrests and few answers, The case eventually went cold once again. Investigators also feared that the unidentified predator, having gotten away, might strike again at another lonely rest stop. Even a televised segment on Unsolved Mysteries in 1989 failed to generate any useful tips, and as usual, I have to specify what a huge phenomenon this show was at the time. On broadcasts and rebroadcasts, Unsolved Mysteries would be seen by tens of millions of households across the United States and Canada. In January 2024, nearly 39 years after Dexter's death, the Dawson County Sheriff's Office finally named a long-suspected perpetrator. They announced that Charles Sullivan, a 79-year-old man serving prison time in Nevada, was believed to likely have slain Dexter Stefanik. Sullivan had a violent past, and he was convicted of a 1979 slaying, but had been let out early, and crucially, he fit the profile from 1985. He would have been in his late 30s at the time, the same age range as the mystery man, and drove a vehicle similar to the described Blazer. In terms of appearance, he was tall, the sort of man who would have had to push a seat all the way back to drive comfortably. Investigators say Sullivan's movements and appearance line up with the witness statements. He was even suspected in other unsolved slayings across the western states, suggesting Dexter may have fallen victim to a serial predator traveling the highways. However, because no physical evidence links him conclusively to Dexter's case, prosecutors have decided to exercise extreme caution. When questioned by detectives about Dexter's slaying, Sullivan invoked his right to remain silent. Lacking definitive evidence and wanting to keep the option open in case things change, they effectively closed the case with the belief that Sullivan is the one responsible. Sullivan currently remains behind bars, where he will stay for the rest of his natural life.